I'm Melly.
I'm Chris.
And this is Beggars Believe, homes of scams, shams, hoaxes, pranks, and charlatans. Stories that you shouldn't believe because someone is lying.
We have to stop after this.
No, it's okay.
You finally got it.
This is episode 10.
I know.
So we're going to do something very silly, but profound.
We've done some fairly silly things, and also some things that I found profound. What's in the middle of this circle?
It is the perfect story for episode 10.
Does it involve the number 10? Are we talking about like a cult?
It's just one of those that, there's a couple that are on my list of being just very good. And this one was like, oh, this sort of rounds out a lot of what I want to do with this podcast.
So we have like very murder adjacent but no murder that involves the Wang Wang Blues on the moon with a human hybrid child who may be a lunar bat.
No. Okay. But almost that bad. So let's pretend.
Okay. I like putting on my different hats.
Yes, this one is, I kind of didn't have the same, like, putting you into the situation because half of this involves so much socio-political stuff that we're going to have to go through. So just generically pretend that you are in intelligence in 1991.
Okay.
And someone says, I have a story for you. And they proceed to tell you 3 stories, one of which is true. And the other 2 are fake.
Okay.
Pick the fake from this list.
Oh, God.
A comedian posing as an archaeologist convinced students at Berkeley that Abraham Lincoln didn't die but was in a coma thanks to aliens and was waiting to be resurrected. 2. A musician, posing as a politician, convinced the people of the Soviet Union that Lenin was a mushroom. And 3. An avant-garde exotic dancer, posing as a historian, convinced some members of the Canadian Parliament that Queen Victoria was a werewolf. Which one is true and which one is the lie?
So one of them is
true, and we are going to be talking about it.
If I had to guess which one was true, in my heart of hearts, the one I want to be true is the one set in good old Canada with the werewolf twist.
It is not. You actually got that one wrong.
What? And I even went for the one that I thought was the most plausible.
I think that's because in Doctor Who, Queen Victoria was a werewolf.
Correct.
So that's why it's in your head
wow.
as being a... No. We are going to the Soviet Union. Sometimes your facial expressions make me wish this was a video podcast.
Well, no! A mushroom?
Yes.
Like, we're talking like a forest-dwelling thing that a Smurf would live in mushroom.
Full-on cottagecore.
This isn't like code for anything, just Lenin is okay. I love people and I hate them at the same time.
So shall we go through the entire situation that gets us to how we get to Lenin being a mushroom?
Yes.
Okay.
I really want to know.
So this all took place in May of 1991. Viewers were turning into Leningrad television for the night, and they were sitting in a very specific time with very specific personal history and socio-political world that we kind of need to discuss to figure out how and why this happened.
Yes, please.
I am not going to go into the full history of the USSR because it's a half-hour podcast and I don't hate myself that much. Not quite that masochistic, you know. But we're going to go into a few basic facts about how the USSR came to be because that is part of this. So we're going back to 1917. In the midst of World War I, the former Russian Empire fell. This was after a series of protests against the monarchy, and especially against food rations. They led to the February Revolution. As a result, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne, and a provisional government was formed. Government, really unpopular, but short-lived. Actually, later that same year, there was another revolution. You know, you're doing real good when you got 2 revolutions in the same year. Yeah. So it was the October Revolution because, again, when you have to name your revolutions after the month they took place in, you're doing great. It's led by the Bolshevik Party, their Marxist leader, Vladimir Lenin. This led to the Russian Civil War, which was fought between a variety of parties. In the end, there were between 7 and 12 million casualties, mostly civilians. The Bolsheviks and the Red Army were emerging as the victor, as much as anyone can be a victor when you have millions upon millions of casualties. As a result, Soviet Union is formed. It was initially led by Vladimir Lenin and was the first ever constitutionally socialist state. After hefty involvement in World War II, they actually represented the majority of the Allied casualties, which I didn't realize. The USSR and the United States went friends to enemies, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yeah, capitalists and communists don't really get along.
And we still haven't like come full circle from like enemies to lovers yet. I'm sure that fiction is out there on AO3, but we haven't gotten there yet.
I'm sure it is. Honestly, the relationship right now is kind of in a weird place.
Yeah. This is like the world's weirdest situation.
Yeah,
right
it
now,
is. It is just not hot. So we had the Cold War. Everyone came really close to nuclear war a few times. But they did a lot in the space race. So, USSR, kind of in a nutshell, up to 1991. I'm completely skipping over Stalin there. I'm completely skipping over... I was going to say,
because I didn't think you were Stalin for time, so...
I was not Stalin for...
But if that is how it has to be, Soviet.
You had a few generations of Soviets by the time 1991 came around.
Yes, we are far removed from Lenin at this point.
We are really far removed from Lenin. But there had a very conflicted relationship with Lenin as a people. He had massively influenced not only his own country, but the world. Cannot debate that he had a huge impact. Some people practically worshipped him. Some people hated him. It was a very conflicted relationship, but he was held to a very high standard because of his position. The second fact was that for the history of television in the country, the government had completely controlled the media, the communist government. Everything broadcast was run through political handlers. The discourse was highly monitored. Scripts were approved. It was a very regimented sort of thing. All of that sort of changed with the leadership of Gorbachev in the mid-'80s. He pushed for transparency in the government, which was referred to by the term glasnost. It was named after a 1965 protest called the Glasnost Rally, which was laid against trial of writers who did anti-communist documents. This and several other protests asked for the trials to be open up to the public. The name sort of became a rallying cry. Gorbachev was basically promising scrutiny of leadership and more freedom for the press, but he was doing it in a way that didn't necessarily put down any solid promises.
Correct. It's the illusion of change.
Well, and the illusion of change, but also the illusion of there was really nothing concrete to it.
Right.
But it did change how the media was being portrayed in Russia at the time. Soviet Union, excuse me. There were more revelations being made in the press to the Russian people about their own history. The one article I read, they said basically that they had gone from having to have approved scripts to just somebody had to sign off on their topics.
Yeah.
It was a massive change, and it was the birth of investigative journalism in the Soviet Union. A lot of young journalists entering the scene. People had started trusting the press more than they did, and it was this kind of temporary, sort of autonomous era that they hadn't perceived before. So we are entering a journalist by the name of Sergei Shalikov. He was once described, and I quote, as being extremely popular. He was one of those young journalists who became stars. They were trusted. They were not seen as someone who was creating superficial stories. They were known as serious, profound, investigatory types of guys.
Okay.
Shalikov was recognized as a known face in journalism on Leningrad television and on a program called The Fifth Wheel. There is in Russian, but I do not speak Cyrillic, so it translates to The Fifth Wheel. So we'll just do that. Which was described as being close to American 60 Minutes.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And this was where he was about to commit one of the greatest hoaxes in the USSR.
Oh my gosh.
He wasn't alone. The other person complicit in this, and honestly more of the mastermind before this, was also named Sergei Kryokin. Kryokin was a musician known for his group Pop Mechanica, which was a noise orchestra and performance group. It was underground, but popular in the 1980s. He was known as a provocateur sort of person. He was known as a trickster. He was known as a prankster. And he was just generally described as being very alien and otherworldly. Like, this was not somebody who fit the norms. Shalikov would describe him as such. When you faced Kurakin, you faced something divine. A young god descended to earth, and we were lucky to have met him. Chris, when I die, I expect nothing less from the eulogy you're going to give for me.
Everyone, you also heard it here. When you review the podcast and you speak about Mel, You know, you have your descriptor.
Yeah, exactly. Kierkegaard himself described himself as being a parasite, a bastard, a cretin, and a piece of shit.
Two very different... Okay.
Not really. I can think of artists I have met who kind of fit both of those.
Yeah, fair enough.
So people tuning into the fifth wheel saw Sherlockov sit down next to Kierkegaard in a 90s-looking office. Like, not a old stately office, but a, like, metal bookshelves type thing.
Correct, yeah.
All lined with books. Big desks in front of them. Very, standard looking. And Sherlockov would address the audience. Today, we are opening the wheels with a new segment. It's called Sensations and Hypothesis. I will host it together with Sergei Kierkegaard, a famous political figure and movie actor. What followed was the most baffling display of half-facts interwoven with pure bullshit. So much misdirection, so much distraction, and it's all set to this very deadpan, scholarly, by-the-book sort of interview.
Oh yeah, that makes that worse.
Yeah.
That makes it worse.
Kierkegaard stated that he had answers about the circumstances and forces that led to the Bolshevik October Revolution. This insight he claimed, while looking at frescoes painted representing the Mexican Revolution. Cross-continental revolutions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. The two had a lot in common, not just bloodshed and people trying to better their lives, but leaders who had visions of a massive, overarching change. The Mexican leaders, he claimed, had gotten their influence from ritualistic ceremonies where the participants would drink peyote.
Okay.
Yeah. We're starting out with peyote. Therefore, the Bolsheviks must have been able to tap into similar visions of a glorious future, which meant they also had to be consuming psychedelics.
Yep. Here we go.
Well, Russia doesn't have cactuses, obviously.
Yep.
What they do have is mushrooms. And Kierkegaard said that psychedelic mushrooms would have a similar effect to peyote of giving grandiose visions of revolutions. This, of course, would require proof that Lenin was eating mushrooms.
Well, okay, no, I guess that makes more sense, because honestly, I didn't think that the L in LSD stood for Lenin, so...
Lenin in the sky with
Lenin
diamonds.
substance diuretic.
So Kierkegaard provided evidence to this.
Okay.
Evidence with huge quotation marks around the word evidence. One piece of evidence he cited was that there was a letter between Lenin and Stalin where Lenin stated, "Yesterday I ate too many mushrooms, but I felt great."
Well, see, for me, eating a lot of mushrooms and still feeling great is still a lot of mushrooms.
Yeah.
Why don't they quantify?
Yeah, and I also make a lovely portobello mushroom gravy with biscuit.
Why am I just learning this now?
I'm going to have to cook
okay.
it for you. It was a Blue Apron recipe? Yeah.
Yeah, I bet Lenin would have loved it.
No, yeah, absolutely. Another item was that Lenin had an object on his desk in a lot of photographs that looked slightly like an abstractive diagram of the structure of a peyote plant.
Now we're really stretching.
Yeah, it is just a desk object. Yes.
Yep.
He also said anyone consuming a steady diet of mushrooms would start to have a fungal consciousness.
I'm now just imagining this person sitting there, and I'm getting images of, like, the History Channel logo in the corner, and just a gentleman going, mushrooms.
Mushrooms. I love the phrase, fungal consciousness. Do you remember that foot fungus commercial where the little sprite, like, flipped up a nail?
Mm-hmm. I sure do. Why? Now?
Yeah, that's the fungal consciousness. He also then claimed mushrooms were made out of radio waves.
Hold on. They're made out of radio waves?
Yes, of course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were explaining cottagecore.
I mean, yeah, you said this was, like, mundane bullshit, so...
So there was a barrage of other so-called evidence I'll get to in a bit, but Kierkegaard summed it all up in the end by saying, "I have absolutely irrefutable proof that the October Revolution was carried out by people who had been consuming certain mushrooms for many years. And these mushrooms, in the process of being consumed by these people, had displaced their personalities. These people were turning into mushrooms. In other words...
They developed a fungal conscience.
In other words, I simply want to say Lenin was a mushroom."
I guess that makes Lenin fun guy.
There it is. You got the one freebie.
You know, there is not mushroom in Russia for other politic. So, you must, if they catch me, they put me in my cellum. Again, I'm done. Please continue.
Okay, you got it all out of your system?
Yeah, I had to get the radio waves out of my brain.
Okay, no problem. There was not a spores thing in there, or...
No, but now that I didn't think about it, that makes me a spore loser.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Now, we've already discussed the relationship the Soviet people had with the media at the time, but there's a bunch of other factors in play that led to this being believed. One, that mushrooms is a kind of otherworldly thing that wasn't unheard of pop culture at the time. In 1970, in England, a book titled The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross was published, which basically linked psychedelics to the origins of religion and gave them this sacred connections.
Wait. Are you telling me that Super Mario Brothers has a religious undertone? Is Toad Christ?
Only if that makes Bowser Mary Magdalene.
Correct.
Okay, there you go. But yeah, it was sort of shorthanded in the news as Jesus was a mushroom.
See, I told you.
Yeah.
Toad is Jesus. I got there. See?
Yeah.
Look at my fungal network.
This was all very heavily discredited, but at the time it would have kind of been in people's consciousness, you know. Another one was how this information was presented. This is 1991. Almost no one would have a way to record from the television, especially in Russia at the time, so they would have been trying to process things as they came from a television that probably didn't have the best reception, probably had a crappy screen.
That's why you grow more mushrooms, so you can boost your radio signals. Duh.
And all of this evidence is presented very rapid fire. Like, there is no time to contemplate what they have just said before they go on to their next bit of evidence. So
this is just like the debate.
Yeah, it is, pretty much. It's also presented in a manner you see in modern conspiracy videos. Kierkegaard would present a real piece of evidence and use it to justify something totally unrelated. Again, just like the debate. And focus on verifying the real evidence as though it proved something unrelated. For example, he shows a picture of Lenin and a group of people. He points out that if you draw between 5 of the faces, it forms a star. Stars are used in Mexican artwork, which proves Lenin's connection to the other revolution, which proves he was taking peyote. And then he spent a lot of time proving the photograph was real, which wasn't really in question, just the conclusions based on that. Another time he points out that Lenin had an armored car and does this whole thing comparing an armored car to the root structure of a psychedelic mushroom, which sounds like one of those things I would have come up with college if I had to, like, have a word count.
Correct.
On a paper.
This sounds like something like ChatGPT would feed me today.
Exactly. Another point, he quickly shows stills from footage with Lenin, claiming it shows the same boy in 5 different stills, and he came to the conclusion the boy's job was there to take the Lenin mushroom hunting. And in fact, it was...
To take the Lenin mushroom hunting.
Yes, the one and only Lenin...
The Lenin.
Out foraging. In fact, it was a different boy in all but 2 of the photos, and in one there was actually no boy present whatsoever. He was just saying there was.
Come with me, Comrade Lenin, but please do not get in trouble.
Just skipping through the wilderness. He cited reputable sources, MIT, history books. They spliced in this separate interview, which was done by an actual mycologist, and it had this very serious and scientific thing. The interview had nothing at all to do with Lenin, barely had any detail in it. They just asked this guy to answer basic questions about mushrooms, and they just kind of spliced this in. And the whole time, Kierkegaard is talking in this scholarly, serious tone, and Shirlikov sits nodding as though he's absorbing all of this and is totally on board with it. Nothing is focused on long enough to have any real reflection on what's being said. To say that this had a reaction from viewers would be an understatement. Shirlikov later said that he had fooled the general public, and it's generally accepted that most people didn't recognize it as a hoax. If anything, they were in disbelief that the platform was given to somebody who believed in such crazy things. Regardless, people were legitimately shaken by this, describing it as physically distressing to them. One viewer was quoted as saying, "We were laughing at this, but at the same time we were looking at each other. What if this is true?"
Yeah, because again, like, the political climate of the Soviet Union, of the USSR at this time, was these were all very well manicured, put together, predetermined news broadcasts. So whatever came out of the state
you
must
didn't
have
put
been
in
approved.
a preposition without
Correct.
prior approval.
That's terrifying,
Yeah.
actually.
So in one story, the day after the episode aired, a group of Bolshevik veterans demanded an official response, and the official response was, Lenin could not have been a mushroom because a mammal cannot be a plant.
You know, It's so funny that we finally started using, like, actual logic. Like, we use some symbolic logic to get to a logical conclusion.
Probably the biggest thing that had such a reaction from a lot of people at the time, Lenin had an almost religious adoration by some of his followers, and there was this ardent love by some people for him. Messing with his legacy and making him the butt of the joke seemed totally out of the question, even if you didn't agree with him. The idea that he would be the butt of the joke was, like, just absurd. So let's take a slight detour.
How much more can we detour?
Let's talk about where Lenin actually was at the time after his death.
Growing mushrooms in a forest.
No, everything but. Even though he was dead since 1924, he's still around.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
After his death, an elaborate tomb was constructed to house his body, constructed of marble and labradite, featuring a standing platform for future leaders to watch parades through the Red Square. And in an almost ritualistic way, like the pharaohs, his body was preserved. His brain and internal organs were removed. The brain was studied extensively, and the heart was accidentally lost. You know,
as you do sometimes. Like,
you just misplace these things.
It's really hard to keep up with those. So
cute.
Aorta.
The rest of his body was embalmed and preserved to be put on display, and it's remained there almost continuously since, with a team working to preserve the appearance of his body. It's continually treated with chemicals to reduce mold, and ironically, a type of fungus.
Correct. Well, I thought they liked the fungus.
And to prevent dark spots from appearing from him. Yearly, the body is removed and soaked in glycerol and potassium acetate, and then he is redressed. His eyes have been removed, which is the part that gives me the heebie-jeebies, and replaced with fakes to hold the shape, and his beard is groomed regularly. And for some reason, the article that discusses this makes explicit note that his genitals have remained untouched, but are not on display.
I love that is written somewhere. I could access that and read that sentence.
Yes, yeah.
Like, that must be great on the taxidermy tour. Like, when you get to the Lenin, it's like...
Take our word for it.
No, if you look hard enough, you will understand and see that genitals are still preserved, but untouched. Untouched.
We remove the dark spots everywhere else. They're untouched. So let's ignore the corpse and get back on track, because I just had to...
That's why we call ourselves Bolsheviks, eh?
Oh, that would have gotten me shot 100 years
I mean, it still would,
yeah.
So...
Okay, so the hoax they did on television really started the whole dialogue that took down some of this untouchable, almost religious nature of the history of Lenin and the original Soviet regime. And it's a dialogue that was really pertinent because in that December, the Soviet Union fell.
Yeah.
So it was very limited amount of time you could have pulled this hoax, and it had a lot of effect. Chelikov went on to have a career in journalism. Karakin went on to be quite well known, performing and adding to political commentary as a sort of comedian, performer, prankster. And he died of a rare cardiac disease in 1996. People legitimately thought it was a prank. When he was in fact dead, stories began to circulate that his life ended because of an otherworldly reason, or that it was the work of the devil himself.
Oops, we lost his heart.
And to this day, apparently in parts of Russia, there is a joke that is, oh yeah, and Lenin was a mushroom, is kind of a catchphrase.
I feel like that's got to be somebody's cover band. Lenin was a mushroom. If not...
Fungal Lenin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Like
if
Fungal
not,
Lenin,
we got a side gig that we can
there we go.
Pop on the Patreon.
Which I need to update.
Yeah. Yeah, to include our first hit single.
Lenin was a fun guy.
Yeah, Lenin was a fun guy.
Intact genitals. Intact genitals and the removed eyes.
See, we've almost got a full song already.
I know,
There's the chorus.
We're a couple of sharks.
We're a couple of Bolsheviks short of a revolution, they would say.
There you go. So the question is, do you remember our socials?
I do.
Ooh.
If you'd like to email us, whether you have comments or a story that we should look into, you can reach us at beggarsbeliefpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us at Beggars Belief on Instagram. And please listen to, rate, and review 5 stars, no less, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And YouTube.
And the YouTube. Yeah, the little avatars are pretty nice.
Yeah.
I changed my hair color on Mel, so that's...
You're not getting a new avatar.
All right.
You're purple forever on there.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, remember, from this side of the microphone, don't believe everything you hear.